Welcome to Miss Martin Muses and Catholicsplaining. Prepare yourself. You are about to be Catholicsplained. And what are we Catholicsplaining today? None other than the sacrament of matrimony, because we have 7 sacraments here in the Catholic Church because we just love them so much we want extra ones. Or rather, we've had the 7 and, well, never mind. But yes, we have 7 sacraments, and today it is the 7th. It is the 7th sacrament. It is matrimony. We started off with baptism, and then we had um confirmation, then the Eucharist, then holy orders. No, we had confession, and then we had the anointing of the sick. We had holy orders, and now we have none other than dun dun dun. I've been waiting for this forever. Marriage, which brings us together today. And welcome everyone coming in. Great to see you all. And we have Stephen Ransom, morning from Los Angeles, California, with a cup of coffee. Thank you. We all need a cup of coffee. We have Chrysanth. Hello, Chrysanth, one of my cousins, another flower. We endorse flowers here at Miss Martin Muses. Indeed, we do. And we also endorse sacraments, all 7, and especially matrimony. Now, matrimony is one of those sacraments like holy orders. Not everyone necessarily has it. Let's see, because, you have to get married to have the sacrament of matrimony. That kind of goes without saying. Now, a baptism, confirmation, the Eucharist, confession, sacrament of reconciliation, confession, or anointing of the sick, yeah, that's one everyone gets. But the last 2, no. And you don't have a right to them. You do not have a right to marriage. But thank you, everyone that's coming in. Great to see you here at Miss Martin Muses. Before we get talking about the sacrament of matrimony, we're going to look again at the definition of the sacrament. Bishop Cook from Blackadder, I believe. I don't know, actually. It might be the same actor. Yeah, but that's from The Princess Bride. Yes. Oops. There it is. There we go. The definition of a sacrament. What is a sacrament? It is an outward sign instituted by Christ to give grace. So there's 3 things that has to make something a sacrament. Has to be an outward sign, something you can see. Has to be instituted by Christ, Jesus himself, and it gives grace. It's the way that Jesus gives grace. And it all flows from the cross. And like many others, I think I've said that not all Christians consider marriage a sacrament. We do. And of course, all the different rites of the Catholic Church and the Orthodox do as well. Though they don't call them sacraments, they call them mysteries, which actually kind of makes sense because it is a mystery. We can't understand it. Yes, wrong historical humor. Oh, okay. Well, yeah. That's okay. That's okay. There's a lot of overlap in all of these. So let's look a little bit about marriage. The matrimonial covenant by which a man and a woman establish between themselves a partnership of the whole of life. It's by its nature ordered toward the good of the spouses and the procreation and education of offspring. This covenant between baptized persons has been raised by Christ the Lord to the dignity of a sacrament. Hey, yo, it's Copa Catania. Great to see you here. Yes, we're talking about matrimony, Catholicsplaining matrimony. And I like to use the word matrimony, the sacrament of matrimony, as opposed to marriage, even though I already did the marriage thing. I think it helps distinguish between what is considered by law, bu- opposed to what is considered a sacrament. For example, there are civil marriages, but the sacrament of matrimony is something else, something higher. Now we get in a little bit of history. How did this whole marriage thing get started? Matrimony. Gosh, I just said it myself. Sacred scripture begins with the creation of man and woman in the image and likeness of God and concludes with a vision of the wedding feast of the Lamb. It's all marriage from the beginning to the end. We start with a marriage and we end with a marriage, the wedding feast of the Lamb. Scripture speaks throughout Scripture speaks throughout of marriage and its mystery, its institution, and the meaning God has given it, its origin and its end, its various realizations throughout the history of salvation, the difficulties arising from sin, and its renewal in the Lord in the new covenant of Christ and the church. Boom. We got lots of words. We have lots of words, don't we? Copacabana says, I have been matrimonied once. It was awesome. Yes. Yeah. And you have procreated as well. Well done. Then we're going to talk about that because, well, about everyone always says, but what about? It's like, well, we're going to get to the what abouts at the end of this, the what abouts. But yeah, this is originally what is ordered to. In the Old Testament, often God talks about being married to his people, that it's a marriage situation between him and the people of Israel. And when the Israelites would turn away to like other gods or something, he would speak of it in terms of infidelity, of adultery, and even using things like divorce. Yeah. So it's all through the history of salvation, and again, Christ, it had its fulfillment, if you will. All of the climaxes of the Old Testament are in the New Testament between Christ and the church. And so there's also a marriage situation symbolism between Christ and the church that is mirrored in the sacrament of matrimony. So it's a very holy thing. Oh, there we go. I should have let the catechism say it for me better. Seeing God's covenant seeing God's covenant with Israel in the image of exclusive and faithful married love, the prophets prepared the chosen people's conscience for a deepened understanding of the unity and indissolubility of marriage. The books of Ruth and Tobit bear moving witness to an elevated sense of marriage and to the fidelity and tenderness of spouses. Tradition has always seen in the Song of Solomon a unique expression of human love insofar as it is a reflection of God's love, a love strong as death that many waters cannot quench. Damn it. Listen to that. Listen to that language. These people are smarter than I. Oh yeah, the Song of Solomon, and that's also got some conjugal stuff going on in there. Yeah, we got some sex. Sex is holy. I've talked about that in my 7 deadly sins about lust. Lust is not the same as the desire for one's beloved. On the threshold of his public life, Jesus performs his first sign at his mother's request during a wedding feast. Yeah, the wedding at Cana. Everything that is really important in the Bible is always in terms of a wedding. The church attaches great importance to Jesus's presence at the wedding at Cana. She, and when we're talking about she, we're talking about the church. She sees in it the confirmation of the goodness of marriage and the proclamation that thenceforth marriage will be an efficacious sign of Christ's presence. And anything that is written down in the Bible is written down for a reason. It's because it's important. Like they didn't have to talk about it, though it was the first miracle he did, turning water into wine at the wedding feast. Get it? It's all a wedding feast. And that his mother was present and that the mother's intercession, Jesus agrees to perform the miracle. Archer Collins says, I have a feeling the church didn't involve itself directly in marriage until the Middle Ages. Weddings, for example, were not actually carried out in church. Well, yeah, they didn't have to be, and we're gonna get into that, but no, but I mean, but it was always a sacrament. It was always a thing, as the fathers testify to. But yeah, and there's a reason why it didn't have to be performed in church. We're gonna see this about the essential elements of marriage, what makes the sacrament of matrimony. Yeah, you say you have a feeling. Actually, yeah, I was gonna say, in the sources, it's there. Um, 1616 says, this is what the Apostle Paul makes clear when he says, well, first of all, it's there in the Bible. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her. Adding at once, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one. This is a great mystery, and I mean in reference to Christ and the church. Again, this connection between Christ and the church, and that the man and the woman literally become one when they are married. They two become one to become three, three being the offspring, a mirror of the Holy Trinity. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. Throughout history, sometimes people have a little bit skipped that about that they tend to focus on the duties that wives had toward their husbands, and because I would say of original sin and concupiscence, they ignored husbands. You're actually also supposed to. That was cultural and all that kind of stuff, but no, it's there. Husbands, love your wife as Christ loved the church. And how did Christ love the church? He gave up his life for her. And okay, and here we go. This is about, according to Latin tradition, the spouses, as ministers of Christ's grace, mutually confer upon each other the sacrament of matrimony by expressing their consent before the church. Yeah, so the spouses are the ministers of matrimony, though nowadays it is in the Latin, right? It You do it between a representative of the church, but it is the man and the woman that confer the sacrament upon each other. Obviously, Christ's grace. Yeah. So, like, for example, we always talk about anointing of the sick. Who is the minister of it? It is a priest and a priest only, or a bishop. But the ministers are only the man and the woman in marriage. Well, sacrament of matrimony. The parties to a marriage covenant are a baptized man and woman, free to contract marriage, who freely express their consent. So this is like who can get married, who for the sacrament of matrimony. I'll deal with the what about the baptized part. The parties to a marriage covenant are a baptized man and woman, free to contract marriage, and they have to freely express their consent. If any of those are missing, they are not married. It is not the sacrament of merit of matrimony. Law might recognize it, but it is the church does not, God does not. It is not a sacrament. I'm saying that God does not recognize it as a sacrament, you know. And to be free also means not under constraint and not impeded by any natural or ecclesiastical law. And I think they get into more detail about it in the next slide, but meaning that it's like you can't be compelled, like, "Oh, I'm gonna kidnap you and force you to marry me." That's not free. Or and when we talk about not impeded by any natural or ecclesiastical law, that is referring to if you have another spouse. Bigamy is not an option if you are, already married. You can't. And also I believe that you have to be mentally competent to be able to do so. But I think that has to also do with being compelled. If you're not mentally competent, you cannot do so. Now, has it been in the past and maybe the present that it's like you either marry this person or else? Yeah, that it can happen. But then again, that would be compulsion and would be cause for an annulment. It has to be free. The church holds the exchange of consent between the spouses to be the indispensable element that makes the marriage. If consent is lacking, there is no marriage. That goes back to that. I'm really wanting to emphasize this. The church holds the exchange of consent between the spouses to be the indispensable element that makes the marriage. If consent is lacking, there is no marriage. And so that's why if you see a wedding, all weddings frankly have this, but if you go to a Catholic wedding, and yes, it goes on forever, but that's what makes it fun. The actual part that is the sacrament of matrimony happening, it happens when they say, "I so and so take you so and so to be my husband, to have and to hold from this day forward in death and sickness and in health till death do us part." And then the wife, "I take you, George, to be my husband." That's when the sacrament of matrimony happens, right there. In the Catholic wedding, before that happens, just for fun, the priest will ask them some questions, like, "Have you come here of your free will?" "We have." Blah, 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 blah. Now, there is not in a Catholic wedding, "If anyone has any objection or something, speak now or forever hold your peace." And the reason we don't do that is because there is something called the banns. So it's already taken place before you get to the altar, before you get to the wedding. And the banns nowadays, I believe, are published in the bulletin. So what it will say is, it says, I know George and Harriet are planning to be married, united in the sacrament of matrimony. Contact the church office or something if you have an objection or something. And I think it has to run for a month or more than once. I don't know how many times the bands have to run nowadays. Um, Oh my goodness, sorry, I was yapping so much I didn't see you all here. I'm sorry, I've been neglecting you. Hi there, the Father's Day lunch over here. Oh, happy Father's Day, can't move. Stephen Ransom Morale, is this the frame for the trope of the forced marriage? Yeah, yeah. You see, it's all got history behind it, which kind of makes a proverbial shotgun wedding invalid. Precisely, it is invalid. Mm-hmm. Heyo, stick a fork in you if you're done. How many fairy tales lead to a scandalous marriage? Oh dear. Oh dear. There is so much truth to that. There is so much truth. And that's why you will see sometimes people will be like, "Oh, everyone can get an annulment." And it's like, "Well, yeah, probably, yeah, because look at all the times that people violate this." And I'm gonna address that in a second. This is why it's so important to not take marriage lightly. I think nowadays, especially, marriage is seen as sacrament matrimony rather is seen as like a civil partnership. It is not. It is something far more than that. And you, in my humble opinion, if you want a civil partnership, get a civil partnership then. But for marriage, you really need to be prepared for the sacrament, just the same way you would get prepared for the sacrament of baptism. It's a lot more than just, I love you. Oh, and this, oh boy. Yeah, they're talking about the new not so Snow White. Yeah, that's pretty bad. Yeah, that's pretty bad. The consent consists in a human act by which the partners mutually give themselves to each other. I take you to be my wife. I take you to be my husband. This consent that binds the spouses to each other finds its fulfillment in the two becoming one flesh. That's the fancy way of saying they gonna bang, okay? So a marriage is not complete, if you will, what they call consummated, fully kaboom a marriage until they have sex. It is called the conjugal act. Sometimes people used to play around with that back in the day where, okay, we'll have this political marriage, but y'all don't have sex. So if we have to like break it up, we can get an annulment because, yeah, it's not fully done until you until it's done. If you watched Outlander, that was a big deal. It was done in a very soap opera way about not only am I gonna are you gonna get married, you're gonna consummate it. You got to do it because an unconsummated marriage can be broken. So, and that's why the wedding night can be something very beautiful. It can be, it's very holy. Sex is holy. True story. I don't think the person's listening. I had a very good friend who got married, and we got permission to sneak in to the hotel room. They let us in. And what we did was, well, we left them some champagne and stuff, but then we took rose petals and scattered them on the bed because, roses is, symbol of all sorts of things and just how beautiful it is. And back in the day, even the priest would come in and bless the marriage bed and sometimes even bless the couple before the marriage bed. I think it was like a whole ceremony. You see that in some movies. What they showed that in First Night. Again, sex is holy. Archer Collins says, which is why there were many different churches sounding that consummation, and conversely, in some cases, could be used to. Yes. Yeah. Well, you know what? I think I know what you mean about that. Like, sometimes they would make people witness it. I'm like, that is so embarrassing. Like royal weddings and things, like where it's really important. You'd have to sit and watch. Oh, I can't think of anything worse than a bunch of creepy men watching you lose your virginity. Oh, which is why there were. Oh, okay. Wait, I just read that. Oh, okay. Maybe it. Oh, mistyped. Oh, understood. Understood. To use to force marriage. Understood. Yes, forced marriage. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was actually horrible. If I think I understand what you're saying, because of the customs back then, which were terrible, which did not favor women. A woman, whether she had sex before marriage by choice or not by choice, in the case of grape, she was still considered damaged goods. It was horrible. And the way they would solve it in some cases was to force the woman to marry the man that did it. I can't think of anything more horrible. But yeah, it would happen. Again, that's taking a good, if you will, and twisting and perverting it. It's horrendous, and I would say in that case, definitely you cannot say that that is free consent by any stretch of the imagination. And women, I mean, women just didn't have recourse. They didn't. It would be Archer Collins says it would be a case of effectively kidnapping, usually an heiress betting her, then claiming that that made them married. Yeah, that too. Yeah, or it's like, well, now she has to marry me. They tried to do that in House of the Dragon. Wasn't that what Matt Damon's character did? And it's like, haha, maybe she'll have to marry me now. But the king wasn't having it. But that's the thinking behind it. And we wonder where our perversions come from, says Stephen Ransom. Yeah. Archer Collins, but to be honest, I'm not actually sure how much that happened and how much it's just urban myth storytelling. Yeah. Well, it's hard to tell because it's definitely been used in fiction. But even in the situations where it would have happened, there was so much shame on the woman, she wouldn't admit it. See, that was another awful part of it. Oh, well, even today, look how hard it is to prove that someone has, been forced. And also today we have the phenomenon, which is horrendous, of women deliberately using that, like lying. Women who do false Me Too's, there's a special place in HE double hockey sticks because not only is that a horrible, horrible thing to do to a man, but it also takes away agency and power from women who truly have, and it makes people doubt. Things like agency and all that are not bad words. They've just been badly used. Voyeurs and such. Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh, yeah. Oh, you're talking about people watch. Oh, gosh, I can't even. I've said it once, I've said it twice, and I'll say it one more time. If I had lived back in the Middle Ages, I would have run to a convent. I'd have been throwing myself at the door of the convent. Let me in, please. First of all, it's so dangerous, childbirth, but there was a respect. You weren't going to mess around with a nun or a woman at a convent or a nunnery. And the cases where it was just like, oh my gosh, y'all going to hell. Also, it was a place where women could be fully educated and, again, run their own lives. If you weren't rich. Rich women could. But that was very rare. And you had the risk of childbirth. Yeah, get thee to a nunnery. Well, I guess for the most part, it would have been getting to a Benedictine convent. If I'd have been living around later, I'd have hung out with the Carmelites. Stephen Ransom says, now I have a better understanding why virginity is so important to the church. Oh, interesting. Are you talking about in reference to because they become one flesh when they have sex? And here's the thing. It's not just the women that should be virgins, if you will. Men too. You see, that's the other thing. It was such a perversion because they would say, well, women have to be virgins, but the men could go and do whatever they want. No, No, it was both. You weren't supposed to be fooling around. You become one flesh, and it's holy. And yeah, that's completely where it all comes from. You don't throw away your body. Your body is a temple, and it's a completely free giving of each other. And I know there's probably going to be pushback because people are like, oh my gosh. It's like, is it unrealistic? I guess. Nowadays, I mean, even so called practicing Catholics, uh, that's a whole other story. But definitely it is ideal. And I think we've maybe seen when we have started to separate marriage from sex, we have a lot of the problems that we've been having, let me just say, from something that became legal in 1973 in the United States. When you take away the sexual act from marriage, from a committed relationship, it's very, very, very rare, like 0.0001 that might need that. But we've seen horrible things done because people aren't committing to each other and being you're so irresponsible. Now, this is not to say that I'm judging anybody. I'm not, because I'll throw myself out in the middle of all that too. I'm not judging anybody. And children are beautiful things no matter how they're conceived. And again, no judgment. But, you know, I don't know how men and women can get back to. I think we're too separated now. I don't know. I don't know what we can do. There's Archicon says there's a Frank Yerby novel set in ancient Greece where a blood-stained sheet is hung out as evidence. I won't go into detail. Yeah, no, that was a thing. That was a thing. And they would use that with royals as well, because I think that they they didn't always sit and watch like a bunch of perverts, but they would show that as proof. And even in the Bible, they would talk about having proof of virginity. That was a thing. Again, there was a double standard that only women were expected to prove it. The woman couples to the church once. I'm not entirely sure what you're saying there. Indeed, both. Yeah. So Archer Collins says, so if a woman is virgin on her wedding, non-marital sex is wrong and adultery is a sin. How could a man not be? Wait. So if a woman is a virgin on her wedding, non-marital sex is wrong and adultery is sin. How could a man not be? Are you talking about how can a man not also be a virgin? Well, yeah, and it's been a double standard. And that's part of what I mean, again, that double standard is part of what led to a lot of the revolt, and the bad parts of feminism. It's like, well, men can get away with it. But again, I want to make it clear. Hey, come on, we're all human. And no judgment. There's no judgment here. I'm talking about what is ideal. To be fair, how could a man prove virginity? Oh, that's true. A man can't prove virginity. Yeah. But they only really cared that the woman was a virgin. Now, part of that was because it was so important to know who the father was. So if the woman was a virgin, then it was absolutely clear that the children, anything conceived, was from the man. And that was incredibly important. And not just in royal lines. That was important for inheritance, for all sorts of things. The concept of what legitimacy meant. So, I mean, in many ways, women's biology is often against us. And I think that's why so many women hate what makes them a woman and find ways around it and feel like if they don't have certain rights to you know what, well, that's not fair. And I understand the thinking behind that. I'm not saying I endorse it. There should be no way for an unmarried man to lose his virginity. Wait. There should be no way? I think that what you mean is oh, well, yeah, I mean, but you know how we all lose our virginity. I mean, yeah, like I said, we're living in the 21st century here. Let's not judge the present so hardly, says Stephen. Remember, these sacraments are of the past. Oh yeah, I mean, I'm not judging. Yeah, I think I've made that clear. Maybe I'm seeing this comment after it. Like I said, there's no judgment. But also, let's also make this clear, and maybe I wasn't clear. You do not have to be a virgin to receive the sacrament of matrimony. The idea of virginity had many other reasons behind it, but you there'd be frankly, there'd be no sacraments if both had to be a virgin. The idea behind it is since sex is something holy, you don't squander it. But yeah, because what makes a marriage is the 2 of you do your consent before God and then you bang. Now, whether you banged before, that doesn't change the fact you banged after. I hate to use the word bang. It sounds the conjugal act. Come to think of it, why do we phrase it lose one's virginity or fail pregnant? Yeah, fall pregnant. Yeah. Well, I think that losing the virginity it's probably, again, from that concept in the past that it's something that you no longer have and maybe because I don't think if you're a virgin on your wedding night help me out here, those that have been virgins on their wedding night, um, I don't think you call that losing your virginity, do you? Again, uh, I think Ben Shapiro was a virgin. I guess we could ask him. I don't know. Dempsey says women would more frequently die during childbirth, so a man could remarry as not a virgin. Yeah, well, that too. Yes. Well, and even back then, people would have sex before marriage. Even the people that got married. I mean, it happened. It happened because we're human. Oh yeah, men would marry all the time. That's why you have so many stepmothers, especially in the fairy tales. Seymour Instant says it's fascinating to see the connection between these things, the origins of vocabulary. Yes, it is, isn't it? See, this is why I love being a historian. Isn't sorry, Archer Collins, isn't that entire idea behind the 100,001 Nights, Scheherazade keeps the Sultan on tender hooks because once she was no longer a virgin, he couldn't be certain. That's exactly what it was. And yeah, I mean, before the days of pregnancy tests and contraception and all that, they that was the only way to know because they often wouldn't even be quote unquote totally sure that a woman was pregnant until she had what they call the quickening, which is when she would feel the baby move. Some people have erroneously said that's why abortion's okay. It's like, no, 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 no. No. Or like Thomas Aquinas said, it was like, no, they were talking about that was the way they knew someone was pregnant. Because guess what? They didn't have the biology we have. They would call it the quickening. Oh, everyone's waving. Biology against you, says Meteor Advocate Timon, and society against us. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Why hello? Oh, Archer Collins says, "Sorry, not communicating well here. I meant that given no premarital sex, etc., there should be no way for a man to lose his virginity for his ring." Oh, yes, in a perfect world, absolutely, because that would mean no women willing to make him lose his virginity, right? If everyone was doing it, there'd be no harlots, there'd be no prostitution, there'd be no women stepping out, there'd be no adultery. But as we know from the dawn of time, I mean, after Adam and Eve and all them, and there were always harlot. Look at the Old Testament; there were prostitutes. Yeah, and that's why we're saying when I say that this is the ideal. Of course, it's the ideal. Now, some people say that well, because this is not ideal, then the church needs to change. It's like no, this is still the ideal. It's like yeah, this is the way it should be. But this goes back to the sacrament of reconciliation and all the other things that we have. But the church also knows that we're human and there's mercy and not a lot of judgment. I mean, maybe in the past there was, but just because we don't judge the individual people, that doesn't mean that we don't have the ideal. Can't help you there. Not married, says Chrysanth. I caught the bouquet at my friend's wedding Friday night, though. Oh, there you go. Well, hello, Jacob Ironside. We're talking about consummation and sex. Yeah, it's a tricky one. It's a tricky one. Dempsey says, I also imagine the mysterious deaths would happen less if you wait. STIs, said they just didn't know it was called back then. Oh, yeah. Well, because think about it. If you had a certain STD, how would it manifest itself? A fever or something? They're like, oh, the dude died of a fever. And back then, you just croak. Oh, say Joe, they're talking to each other. Yay, hello. Archer Collins says, I have heard that we have a misconception regarding eunuchs in the harem, the recognition of females. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, and understand part of the reason why we don't know a lot about women and stuff because it really wasn't okay for women to talk about it. It really wasn't. It really wasn't until like the 70s. Okay. You ever read speaking of talking about it, who was it? John Paul II. He wrote a book called Love and Responsibility. I think he wasn't Pope at the time. I think that's the first like church book talking about the female happy ending. Official. uh and yeah, you're like, dude. But of course, he's talking about the responsibility for a man to make his woman happy. Okay, that's actually part of a holy thing. Now, back in the day, sometimes they used to think that that was important because they thought that's how conception happened. But that was like for a selfish reason. But yeah, we just didn't talk about it. And it just was culture that said we didn't. Knowing this sacrament, Seedman says, changing my understanding of the garden, Eve, snake, and Adam, a direct connection to the mysteries of marriage. Absolutely. Absolutely. And remember, part of the breakup between men and women, the enmity between them happened with original sin. We're not supposed to be at odds with each other. So that's why marriage is such a mirror of the way it's supposed to be, a preview for the heavenly banquet of the wedding feast of the Lamb. Obviously, it's not perfect. And I have seen some people, and they've done everything quote unquote right. And they think, well, if I just, do all this great stuff and I just follow all this, that means that our marriage is just going to be happy all the time. And then it's like, no. So there's the other side of it as well, where you can think you don't have to work at it or no. Every state in life has its challenges. And frankly, you need to be careful of pride. You need to be careful of pride. Archer Collins says, without meaning any offense to those who are believers, I do think that various religious responses to sexuality are intended to channel that into a productive and supporting relationships. Okay, I need to see part 2 of this. Um, okay, well, we'll see there in this in part 2 on this one. Alright, so I'll get let's go ahead. Now that was a heck of a concept to put into less than 200 words. Okay. Uh, I don't think that's offense. Yeah, we all wanna have sex. So it was what do they call it? A remedy for our desires. "It's better to marry than to burn," says St. Paul. And he, as a celibate man, was saying that. That's not offense at all. There is nothing to fear from the truth, and nature and biology and all there's a reason why the great scientists and great biologists and all of them, even a lot of them today, are Catholic. The great work done by, the great scientists, I was Saint Francis Xavier, he talked about mutual comfort. We all know what that means between the spouses, but also Saint Albert the Great, Mendel. There is always a natural explanation for supernatural things, supernatural desires. What we do, though, and what we believe is that Christ sacralized them. Remedy for is much better phrasing than mine, yeah. Well, I think the Anglican communion still uses that in their marriage ceremony, in their marriage liturgy. And you see, this is where things get confusing because a lot of what developed from that liturgy, because the Reformation happened before the Council of Trent, where we got what the Tridentine liturgy, which kind of made everything kind of the same, because you can go to a fully Catholic mass with the Anglican liturgy because it was never abrogated, and John Paul II and Benedict XVI really solidified that. So if you do go to, an Anglican use wedding, they might still use that language. Yeah, but that's St. Paul. I don't think I put that quote up by St. Paul because he said, "It's better not to marry, but if you burn, marry." We know what he meant. And um, speaking of consent, we're still talking about that. The consent must be acted at the will of each of the contracting parties, free of coercion or grave external fear. No human power can substitute for this consent. If this freedom is lacking, the marriage is invalid. So they're just hammering it home. Yeah, no human power can substitute for this consent. Okay, and then this is talking about the whole thing put together in a nice little bow. The entire Christian life bears the mark of the spousal love of Christ and the church. Already baptism, the entry into the people of God, is a nuptial mystery. It is, so to speak, the nuptial bath, which precedes the wedding feast, the Eucharist. Christian marriage, in its turn, becomes an efficacious sign, the sacrament of the covenant of Christ and the church, since it signifies and communicates grace. Married between the baptized person is a true sacrament of the new covenant. Say that 10 times fast. It's all connected. Yeah, remember, right before you receive the Eucharist, the priest says, "How blessed are those called to the supper of the Lamb." Archer Collins says, oddly, Richard Heinlein phrased some of those ideas quite well in short phrases he attributed to his Lazarus Long character. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Pendant is my middle name. Oh, pedant. Sorry, rather. Yeah. And if I'm correct, in South American cultures, uh, they all have like a gazillion names. Technically, I have 4 names if you count my confirmation name, though legally, that's not my name. Just my middle name is part of it. But yeah, 4. Yeah, I've got 4. Okay, the marriage covenant by which a man and a woman form with each other an intimate communion of life and love has been founded and endowed with its own special laws by the Creator. By its very nature, it is ordered to the good of the couple as well as to the generation and education of children. Christ the Lord raised marriage between a baptized to the dignity of a sacrament. And notice they say between the baptized, because some people have said, well, do we recognize Protestant marriages that happen when, yeah, it's like, of course we do. Yeah, baptized, marriage between the baptized. Because, and even civil marriages. The only time it's not necessarily recognized by the church is if somebody is, well, that's a whole other story. But yeah, marriage is, yeah, if this consent is present and there are no impediments, and that's what we're talking about with ecclesiastical law. Like if I were to go ahead and get married, I would have like why would I want to go secretly and go get married and all that? You don't need to. Okay? And you don't necessarily have to be married in a Catholic church to have a valid sacrament if you are a Catholic. But you need to work with your parish and your church and get the proper dispensation because it's like, hey, why are you doing this? Because sometimes there are good reasons for that. So it's not an absolute thing. Remember, it's the man and the woman, the baptized people that convert upon each other. If one of them are non-baptized or if none of them are baptized, that's another story that I'm going to talk about in a second. But is it still marriage? Yes, it is. Is it the sacrament of marriage, matrimony? Not, no, not exactly. But again, I would say, like, okay, let's take two Jews. They don't want it to be the sacrament of matrimony. They don't believe that Jesus is God. Okay, but is it a marriage? Yes. Um. Oh, I went to school with a girl that had 6 names. My goodness. My goodness gracious. Oh, yeah, and that's the whole idea of secret marriages. Oh my gosh, that's something that is so just from a Harlequin romance. It's ridiculous. And that's why when Meghan Markle tried to go, "Oh yeah, we had secret marriage with the archbishop before the wedding." Completely lying, and the archbishop is like, "No, no, that did not happen," for about 10,000 different reasons. It would have made him guilty of fraud, but yeah, the idea of a secret marriage, you just can't, because part of it is it's it's a public act. You can't fake it. Braveheart was one of those, oh gosh, yeah, where they the secret marriage. There are only very, 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 very small situations where it is so grave that a so-called secret marriage has to happen, and I promise you, it doesn't happen very often. Um, it's just not gonna happen. Okay. Now this is what normally happens, because remember we told you that the man and the woman are the ministers of the sacrament. The priest or deacon who assists at the celebration of a marriage receives the consent of the spouses in the name of the church and gives the blessing of the church. The presence of the church's minister and also of the witnesses visibly expresses the fact that the marriage is an ecclesial reality. So this is like what makes it a public act. But as we see, they assist. There are witnesses and they receive the consent because marriage, it is a public act and it's a legal thing, because if you get married in a church, at least in America, it is recognized by law as well as by uh, as a sacrament. So it is most appropriate that when you get married, that yeah, the priest is there to give you the blessing and showing, it's a public act and you have witnesses to say it happened. That goes back to the whole secret marriage thing. It's like, no, it's not a secret. You have witnesses to say it happened. And tradition is, I think, you have two officially, like each spouses have two. But in a modern Catholic wedding, the tradition is that the best man is the witness and the official witness, and the maid of honor is the witness. But again, these are customs. Oh, no. I'm sure you oh, yeah, you don't like well, yeah, that's not history, is it? No. So that's why when we talk about being married in the church, why it's important. Again, if you're not gonna be married in the church, why? If you're a practicing Catholic, if you're not gonna have the witness. Now, again, the why can be a good reason. It can be a good reason. And I think I've already told you, like, if one of the spouses is not Catholic, but it's not done in secret, you go and you inform the church, and yeah, they'll give you their blessing. Is it has to do with the why. But in general, you know, why not get married in the church? Ah, and this is why they're saying this too. This is the reason why the church normally requires that the faithful contract marriage according to the ecclesiastical form. And again, remember, some of these things evolved over the years where they're like, okay, we need to follow this form just to make sure things don't get weird. But just because the church might have made something more official over time, that doesn't mean it wasn't present. It just wasn't present in the current form. And several reasons converge to explain this requirement. Sacramental marriage is a liturgical act. It's a liturgical act. The man and the woman do it. It's a liturgical act. It is therefore appropriate that it should be celebrated in the public liturgy of the church, and often during the holy sacrifice of the Mass. Usually, it is when it is not done within the sacrifice of the Mass, is because one of the spouses is not Catholic, and that can bring some awkward situations up. And it's just like, no, okay, we'll just do the marriage part of it, the sacrament matrimony. Marriage introduces one into an ecclesial order. Yeah, this is your vocation, kids. It's your vocation as much as if you're a priest, a religious, a nun, a monk. Yeah. It is there and creates rights and duties in the church between the spouses and toward their children. Since marriage is a state of life in the church, oh, that's what I just said, state of life. Certainly, certainty about it is necessary. Hence the obligation to have witnesses. Yeah, it can't have maybe happened any more than an ordination of a priest or a baptism, all these things. The public character of the consent protects the I do once given and helps the spouses remain faithful to it. Yeah, yeah, you can say it in public. Well, look, that's what we do with the president or members of parliament. They all have to swear an oath. Heck, I remember when the Queen died, and you saw the English Parliament. They all swore an oath of allegiance to the King Charles. So, oh gosh, if he's the best, way that she married. Well, in a lot of soap operas, that's usually what's going on. Okay, we're talking about some hyphenations and things. Yeah. I This isn't essential part of it. This is more custom, but yeah, I get married. I'm taking the name of my husband. I, I don't so that the I do of the spouses may be a free and responsible act, and so that the marriage covenant may have solid and lasting human and Christian foundations, preparation for marriage is of prime importance. And that's what I'm talking about. I think that so many people aren't ready to get married. I mean, how many times have you been at a wedding where you're like, "Ugh, don't do it. Don't do it. You're not ready or you're not going in with the right attitudes." Um, and I've had some priests tell me that when the two people go through the marriage prep, you have to go through marriage prep. The church is kind of strict about that. There may be some exceptions to that. And again, when I'm talking about the norm, like two Catholic people. Maybe if one of them's not Catholic, maybe they don't. I don't know. So don't ask me that. But they have found they shouldn't get married as they go through it. I mean, because two spouses, they love each other. But there's lots of things that they go through that they really have to do a lot of soul searching. They go on retreats and all that. Or I have been told by some priests that they still got married, but they realized they weren't ready and they waited like another year or something to really understand what you're getting into. It's very important. And just like anything else, I mean, if you want to get baptized, it takes like a year of preparation in the church, though technically, hypothetically, under certain circumstances, of course, you can baptize at any time. But yeah, it ordinarily takes a year. Confirmation, same thing. Like if you're already baptized, like me, yeah, uh, and for teenagers for their confirmation, I think they're under 2 years. I mean, you just need to be educated, and I think that if you are educated, and if you are prepared, and it increases the communication between the spouses before they're married, that you have a better chance of success. Why not? We prepare for everything else. Why not this? Archer Collins says, Miss Martin says, I DM'd you a link to an article which explains better what I think about. Or, oh, excellent. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I might need to look up the etymology of best man. Yeah, I'm not even sure where that comes from. The sacrament of matrimony signifies the union of Christ and the church. Oh, we talked about that. It gives spouses the grace to love each other with the love with which Christ has loved his church. The grace of the sacrament thus perfects the human love of the spouses, strengthens their indissoluble unity, and sanctifies them on the way to eternal life. So you don't have to do it on your own. Okay, you don't do it by your own efforts. All grace. And God will give you the graces to bear it. Again, I'm talking about an ideal situation, not necessarily, well, a non-ideal situation. We all know what those are. Oh, I think this is kind of repeating itself. Marriage is based on the consent, on their will to give themselves each to the other mutually and definitively in order to live a covenant of faithful and fruitful love. I think what they're getting into here is, are they going to use the word? Not quite. I was thinking about adultery. They're getting into adultery here. But before we do, unity, indissolubility, and openness to fertility are essential to marriage. Yeah, you got to be open to children. Now, one could say, well, what if you're like old or you're past childbearing age? Like, I'm not going to be having any children. But so, like, if I were to get married, can I get married in the church? Of course I can. Or would the church recognize a marriage I enter into? Yes, they would. Because I'm still open to it. Whether it's going to, but biology says it's not going to happen. But I'm open to it. It's the attitude toward it. License to Wed with Robin Williams. Got a good movie on this subject. Oh, okay. Yeah. Openness to fertility, and it's essential to marriage. Unity, you got to be unified. Indissolubility, yeah, it's for life. Well, you say it's for life as long as we both shall live. I'll talk about exceptions to that in a second. Polygamy, duh, is incompatible with the unity of marriage. Yeah. Polygamy, no, not going to happen. It can only be between one man and one woman. Divorce separates what God has joined together. Yeah, no divorce. The refusal of fraternity turns married life away from its supreme gift, the child. Yeah, it's toward fertility. You cannot refuse fertility. Now, yeah, you cannot divorce. First of all, you can't break a sacrament. This is where I was going to clarify. Let's just say it is important for a variety of reasons that you separate and that you get away from this person and even contract a divorce. There there's no sin in that. You get a civil divorce. You must. And we all know the situation. So of course, yes, if you need to get out and for financial reasons, you need to get a divorce. You can get a divorce. You're not breaking the sacrament. It's a civil thing. Or it was never a sacrament to begin with, which is in many cases of these bad situations in marriage. And not only do you get a civil divorce, but the church also acknowledges an annulment. So it doesn't mean that you have to stay in a horrible situation your entire life. When you think about what we're talking about, the sacrament of matrimony and the same thing, we talked about confirmation and baptism and all that. It's an indelible mark, it's an indelible bond, but it doesn't mean that it cannot be you can't kinda move away, if you know what I mean. Even in the case of ordained priests, we talked about being losing their faculties, sometimes incorrectly called defrocked. Yeah, you can, and it can, and it must, often the church does that. So I wanted to make that clear. Stephen Ransom says, "Indeed, these are laws to aspire to, ideals to live by, rules to measure ourselves, a guide to excellent." Yeah. Archer Collins telling us about best man, antiquated expression used to delineate the best swordsman by your side as you kidnapped your betrothed. Oh my gosh. Wow. That gives a well, there we go. Well, this goes back to the whole kidnap thing. If you're kidnapped, it's not a valid marriage. Yeah, this is where we're getting into adultery. By its very nature, conjugal love, sex, requires the inviolable fidelity of the spouses. And you see, and this is where you want to talk about a deal breaker for me. I will not tolerate adultery or cheating if I'm with somebody. It's like, you want to leave, you leave. But you cheat on me? Oh, hell no. Oh, hell no. There is no greater betrayal than cheating. And, and of course, adultery when you're in marriage. Oh my gosh, how on so many levels. On a spiritual level, because of what it does to your heart, but it puts you in danger. HIV, other STDs. How could you, you're thinking that you're in an exclusive sexual relationship and your spouse is bringing you something you don't want, if you catch my meaning, something that could kill you. What a horrible, horrible betrayal. Oh, I do not like adultery. So you inviolable fidelity of the spouses. This is a consequence of the gift of themselves which they make to each other. For one thing, you made a vow it'd only be you two. If you don't want to have fidelity, then don't get married. Love seeks to be definitive. It cannot be an arrangement until further notice. The intimate union of marriage as the mutual giving of two persons and the giving of children demand total fidelity. In case we don't realize, total fidelity of the spouses and require an unbreakable union between them. Again, this is where history and human nature and sin and all that has tolerated men committing adultery. And I'm like, no, no adultery. Adultery is a mortal sin. Uh, yeah, it's terrible. Okay, now this gets to the whole thing about children. Because I think I was telling you that it's like, well, what about someone like me? Can have children physically. Spouses to whom God has not granted children can nonetheless have a conjugal life full of meaning in both the human and Christian terms. Their marriage can radiate a fruitfulness of charity, of hospitality, and of sacrifice. So, whether you're a young person and you are, one of the spouses is infertile, or you're just too old to have kids. Yeah, you have a conjugal life full of meaning. In other words, you can have sex. Yes, you can have a conjugal life, and it has the same graces, the same meaning as whether or not you don't have children. And that fruitfulness can also be a spiritual thing. Charity, hospitality, sacrifice, all that good stuff. The same way that if you are living a life of celibacy, it is still a fruitful life. Or if you just happen to be single and unmarried, it is still fruitful. Archer Collins says the kidnap is actually more complex. It doesn't necessarily mean taking the bride without her consent. Understood. It's probably the language. Probably the language. Oh, you know what? The catechism actually says something here, but I decided not to put it in. I don't know why. 1655. What they also mention that if you are not married, like I am not in religious life, and I still think that my calling is to marriage. I just haven't found I am just not married yet. And saying that that's not like a problem, and it's not like even it says sometimes through no fault of their own, because sometimes there's this almost judgment of, well, you didn't get married. Well, you must be selfish. You must be this. It's like, listen, if I got to spend the rest of my life with someone, I'm not going to spend the rest of my life with someone until I found that somebody, and still until I want to be with that person for the rest of my life. And that's not by choice. You got to find, you got to want to be with a man the rest of your life. And if you don't, you shouldn't get married to him. So the single life is also just as fruitful. And it's not problematic or anything like that. I think that there used to, more so in the past than today, but there used to be a lot of derision, especially on women, the whole old maid thing. It's really rude. Just means you haven't found your spouse or you're currently not married. Yeah, Stephen Anderson says the disease angle makes adultery a practicality to health. Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's bad for you spiritually, it's bad for you physically. It's just such an act against charity. Language is real connection to history and anthropology, says Stephen Rinson. We do things for reasons, very real reasons, practical reasons. That is true. And I should also say that if you are in religious life, rather, you will see often that nuns and sisters, they will wear wedding rings. It's obviously not a literal thing. We don't believe that. Okay, but it is a marriage. Like the whole idea you're a bride of Christ, you're married to Christ, meaning that that's your husband. You're going to give all your devotion to Christ. That doesn't mean a literal marriage. Sometimes people get that confused. And I've known priests sometimes to wear wedding rings, though I think they tend to do it on their right hand so they don't confuse people. Again, because they're married to the church. It's also a form of marriage. It's a spiritual marriage that bears, fruit to the way we'll all be in the heavenly kingdom. That's the idea there. Now, of course, if you're a priest and you're married, yeah, you have it on your left hand. And I've said I've known many married priests. Oh, there we go. Yeah, yeah, referred to as the brides of Christ. Precisely. Yeah, brides of Christ. And when I say not literally, because I once had a Mormon roommate who was just so offended by that because she was like, Christ can't have more than one wife because they actually believe some things about Christ really being married and the nature of his body and him being God and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, oh, well, we don't believe that. And it's a saying, it's not like literal. All right. Oh, we just talked about that. Yeah. And then last but certainly not least, the Christian home is a place where children receive the first proclamation of the faith. For this reason, the family home is rightly called the domestic church, a community of grace and prayer, a school of human virtues, and of Christian charity. So, you will. So, your family is what we call the domestic church. Obviously, not the same as the church, not the same as what you do at your parish when you gather together as a church. But the family is a special little subset called the domestic church. So, yay, did you know that if you have a family in the Christian home and all that, that's a domestic church? Yay. Good stuff. And the model, of course, being the Holy Family. Jesus didn't have to have a family. We call them the Holy Family, devotion to the Holy Family, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Yeah. Yeah. Um, so spouses take the Holy Family as their patrons, if you will. Joseph and Mary, like Mary, wives are Mary, and men are supposed to be like Joseph. You saw what Joseph, the kind of husband he was to Mary, and the father he was to Jesus. That's the goal. That is the ideal. See, Ransom says Mormons have don't they have multiple wives? There's some cheek. Yes and no. It's complicated. It used to be normal. Then they said they weren't supposed to, but some different sects of Mormons still do it. I just kind of stay away from Mormons. And when I say stay away, let me rephrase that. I have friends that are Mormons and all that. They're fine, and I respect their right to believe whatever they believe. What I'm saying is theologically, I don't delve into that for several reasons. A, awkward. B, I don't have an expertise on this. Many people do and could explain it far better than I. Yeah. Alrighty. Well, that's going to bring us to the end of the sacrament of matrimony. I used to love it when I taught religion. And if you had the kids list the 7 sacraments, depending on their age, and when they get to matrimony, they would spell it like matrimony. It was so cute. Well, I'm going to give this question to you all because we have now finished the 7 sacraments. I'm going to throw this question up. What would you like to be Catholic-splained next? What topic would you like to hear? Now, I can I can veto it. There would be several reasons why I might. Like, I'm not going to Catholic-splain something I don't know too much about, but I want to hear from you. What do you want? What do you want Catholic-splained next? Please let me know in the chat. Or if you can't think of something right now, please feel free to let me know on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. I need to start using Instagram more. I fear change. I fear change, and I don't like to do it too much. But throw out your thoughts in the chat. Oh, hymn rant. You want a hymn rant? Yes, the Catholic music. Catholicsplaining Catholic music, there's something there. If you want to get a small preview of what I might talk about, if you look at my close encounters of the solfege kind, because I do talk a little bit about the building of the scale in that. And in my second part, which is probably going to take me almost as long as the first one, I will talk about the importance of things like the tonic, the subdominant, the dominant, in that's what makes a difference with a hymn as well. Stephen Ransom says, "Bravo, Miss Smart Misa. I vote these on the sends on the playlist. Just lovely." Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Archer Clown says, "I can see some practicalities to polygamy, but only in the circumstances when female population heavily outnumbers the male." Yeah, and I think that's what was going on with Mormons as well. It'd make my life easier as long as I'd be left alone. But here's the awful thing about polygamy. I think the TV show Big Love showed it. It's not sharing your husband, it's having to deal with the sister wives. Gosh, imagine having to deal with the jealousy and all that. How Catholics do not pray to false idols, Mary, saints, statues, etc. Okay, yeah, that's a big one. Yes, yeah. Misunderstanding about prayer versus worship. Catholicsplaining the Flying Nun. It's not real. There you go. I've done it for you. It might be interesting to find out how the Catholic Church relates in regards to other religions. Talking about other religions or other Christian communities. Because I know I have studied a lot of the Reformation and things like our differences in our beliefs about justification, free will. We believe in free will, for example, all that. But that's also tricky because there's so many different denominations. But if you stick with just like Luther and a few of the main ones, Calvin, it's doable. Chris Hant says, "I know you've gone over the rosary. Can you go into depth on the different mysteries? I get kind of stumped with the last two, the glorious mysteries." Oh, well, that might be in like a Catholicsplaining the Mother of God thing. And it might need to be a little bit separate from the communion of saints. Because, the dulia versus the hyperdulia. But yeah, the Assumption, Scott Hahn has a good thing on the Assumption in the crowning. Well, the crowning's easy. Revelation 12. The Assumption's this Tuesday. The Bible verses there explain a lot of it as well. Too. I love a Catholicsplaining on the hierarchy of the church, says Stephen Ransom, from brother to pope or whatever. Oh, well, you know what? I think I did that with holy orders a bit. But I know what you mean. Well, first of all, brothers, they aren't in the line. Brothers and monks. So they have their own hierarchy within their different orders. Maybe it's something about religious life versus, the hierarchy. Yeah, hierarchy is what? Deacon, priest, bishop, actually, frankly, and then the Bishop of Rome. Yeah, maybe that might go along with a Peter. Maybe that'd be a Pope-splaining one. That would probably work with the hierarchy of the church and connecting it with Peter, the papacy versus, the other bishops. The first among equals. Actually, David Weber treats polygamy very well in his Grace and Culture. Oh, okay. Get the Catholicsplaining Da Vinci Code. Oh, gee. Well, that's really easy. It's all nonsense. It's ridiculous. Not even historical. And that's what makes me mad. He tries to claim it's based on. It's like, no, you can Google it in 3 seconds and know it's just full of crap. I mean, Opus Dei and all that. But the fact that he tried to use real people, that was his sin. You want to make up something, make up a church, make up an order and all that. But I mean, yeah, Da Vinci Code was just ridiculous. And the fact that anyone even thought there was any truth to it, I mean, it's just bad history. Yep, I was asked to come into the early mass on Tuesday since I work nights to help usher. There we go. Catholicsplaining the Pope Mobile. Yeah. Well, there's an easy one. That's history because he got shot. Yeah, that might go with the Secrets of Fatima. and the private revelation versus public revelation. These are all very good suggestions. Um, I'll write some of these down, then I'll roll. When in doubt, I like to roll my dice, my D&D dice. Only he had a bat. Only he and Batman have one. Yes, they do. Yeah, these are all very good. Yeah, I might go on Monday night. It really depends. My goodness. Yeah, August 15th, that's my feast day, actually. So, yeah, it's good stuff. That's my official feast day. I didn't learn about the little flower till afterwards, so she's my unofficial feast day, September no, it's October 1st. She died on September 30th because my internet name Teresa is her, so I have, like, an internet feast day and a real feast day. To be fair, some of the bits about the historical Jesus entering Northern conspiracy stuff in Da Vinci Code, maybe, but there was some just, you know well, I just get so insulted with the idea that the only thing that made Saint Mary Magdalene important was, well, she was really married to Jesus. It's like, that's just stupid. Yeah. Chat's been awesome as usual. Yes, yes. Yeah. Well, like I said, and maybe it's because 'cause I'm a snobby historian. It's like, listen, dude, and the fact that he admitted he wasn't coming from a place of good faith, I'm just like, I just don't have time for that. Um, like, I will debate anybody who is arguing in good faith or has knowledge, but, he's clearly very ignorant about very basic historical things, and so I I'm not saying that I want to dismiss his work, but yeah, I do, actually. I don't know. It would be like trying to say that, Pride and Prejudice and Zombies was accurate, or, Abraham Lincoln and Vampire Hunter, and try to debate that. You can't. But that being said, I know that there are some people that really enjoy the Da Vinci Code as fiction, and I won't take that away from them. I'm just I'm a snobby historian, and I like the truth, even in fiction.